So today we're going to be talking about what do you do when you actually start with an idea, with an innovation or an invention, maybe a discovery that you've come through a research project or a new technology. And in reality, that's what I spend a lot of my time doing is working with researchers who have got these great ideas, these great discoveries, these great research outcomes, and they're trying to work out, well, how do I get that out into the marketplace? How do I actually translate my idea or my invention, my discovery into impact? And that's really what we're going to focus on at the moment. And so in reality, we've got the business model canvas, which you've seen before, and it's been really well established, and it's really designed to do innovation, largely in corporates, but also been used very extensively in the startup ecosystem, in the lean startup approach. But I want to show us how we can actually use the business model canvas in a research translation manner to be able to work out how do we help researchers and how do we help inventors who have got something, who've got an idea, and they're trying to work out how do we create a strategy to take that idea into the marketplace, into the wild, to be able to make a difference. Not necessarily commercially, I'm not calling it commercialization because it may not be something that generates money, but it may be something that actually generates impact, and that's the focus. So whereas normally in the business model canvas we start with the value proposition and customers. Now, if you're not in a commercial enterprise, then customer's not necessarily a word that you might feel comfortable with. And so in reality, this is really focused on users. These are just people who are going to use your idea or beneficiaries. So users and beneficiaries are really who is actually going to benefit from your idea. Let's put your idea is somewhere. Let's just again use the light bulb motif, because the light bulb is your idea. And ultimately what you want to do is work out, well, how do I take my idea, how do I take my invention or my discovery and get it into the hands of users or beneficiaries? Now, users and beneficiaries are people who are actually going to benefit from it directly, but they may not actually be the people who are going to give you what you need to get it there, because they actually just want to use it. They just want to buy it. They just want to get access to it. They just want to benefit from it. And so in this section over here, we're not just talking about users and beneficiaries. We're also talking about investors. We're talking about companies, or let's call them customers. That's an organization that's going to take your idea to the marketplace. And let's just talk about this whole category as being stakeholders. So the customers in a research translation or an invention sort of translation process are really users, beneficiaries, investors, customers, and all the stakeholders that are actually going to show an interest in actually getting your idea into the hands of people who can actually experience the benefit. And so that takes us from this idea point through these channels. And so channels is really, I guess, in a research translation point of view, is really thinking about, well, how am I going to get it to them? Okay, I've done the research, I've invented the thing, I've got a widget, I've got a paper, I've got a patent, and how am I going to get that there? And so in reality, there's a few different ways. Either you can do it yourself, with a startup. You create a company, and that doesn't happen very often, to be honest. In fact, in the US, only less than 2% of academics ever create a startup company. So startup is a way, and if you go into a startup, then obviously you need to get users and beneficiaries interested, but you also need an investor to be able to give you money to actually do this process, because this is expensive and it's really long and it's really hard. Or you might just license the technology to a customer, to a company that actually is able to actually service and take that product or service to the users and beneficiaries. Or maybe it's actually, you might give it away for free. And you might have done that in publishing it, but maybe the users and beneficiaries aren't reading those publications. So you might need to find a different way, whether it's a website or whether it's a training program. There's all sorts of ways to actually think about translating. So this is really about how do we translate that idea to you? And to do that, really what you've got to do is you've got to excite your customers, your users, your beneficiaries, your investors. And so in reality, the value proposition, which is sort of often think of around your what, to actually get people to invest or to buy or to show interest, this actually really becomes your why. So why does anyone want to do this? You've got to give them a really compelling reason as to why they should do this, because this is not only just faster, better, or cheaper. That might be enough if it is a lot faster or a lot better or a lot cheaper. But in reality, sometimes what you might find is this has to be a whole new way of doing things. And reality, if you want to do a startup company, then it really almost has to be new, because just a little bit faster, a little bit better, a little bit cheaper is probably not going to turn this into a $100 million company, which is what a lot of investors are looking for. So ultimately, this is really about developing your strategy to take your why, embedded in a what, to your, let's call these guys the who. So this is really I guess the key part of it. And this is that right-hand side of desirability. Now, customer relationships in this context is really about, well, how do they find out you exist? And this is really about connecting, and it's about people to people. It's about just getting out there and talking to lots of people. This is actually a human sport, a human activity. Just putting it on a website, publishing in a paper is not going to cut it. This is about going to conferences. It's about talking to lots of people. And we know from lots of research we've done in helping researchers and inventors and entrepreneurs take ideas into the marketplace. This is all about talking to humans. This is all about running experiments and actually trying to work out how do people discover the actual application, that the benefits that can be had from this why and this what. And so these are a really important part of it. But on the left-hand side of the canvas, this over here, key resources, really becomes your IP or your know-how. And that's really your competitive advantage. Maybe you've discovered some new code or a new algorithm or a new design. And this really becomes the key, I guess, key resource, which is going to protect you from competition. It's going to be the thing, particularly if it's a patent or if it's know-how, that is actually going to attract an investor, because they know that you've got a moat around your idea that's protected so it's not easily copied. And then your key activities is really your capability or your skills. And that's really about how do you actually design and describe what it is you have, and what are you going to do to take this IP, this know-how, and be able to build a product or a what or a service and deliver that through to your end users, beneficiaries, customers. And the way that you do that is by having lots of partners, lots of people who are going to collaborate, who are going to work with you to help you do that process. And you need these people because you actually can't do it all yourself. It's really important you understand that partners are the most important way to reduce the risk and to increase the speed and accelerate the speed in which you can actually run this process. Now, cost is really thinking about, effectively, just think of it like your budget. How much money do you need to be able for you to do this? But also, what is it going to cost for the end product or service? Because what you're trying to work out in this bottom part here is this viable? Sure, it's a great idea, and yes, lots of people want it, but like hydrogen storage was for the last sort of 30 years, it was just too expensive. And so really thinking about your budget for your own key activities, but also the end product, what is actually the cost going to be to actually deliver that end product? And then over here, this is called revenues. And again, if you're maybe a not-for-profit, if you're a social enterprise, you're not thinking about revenues, but let's call about this being the impact. If it's a social enterprise, or if it's something that's actually just going to make a big impact globally, maybe it's not going to make lots of money, but it actually still has to potentially have an income source. Someone's going to have to pay for it. So where are you going to get the money from? And it could be from customers buying something. It could be from an investor investing money in a startup, or it could be from a collaboration or a joint venture of some form. So if you see the business model canvas this way, let's call it a research translation canvas. This is a way that researchers and inventors and entrepreneurs who've got an idea can think about their idea in a way to actually increase the likelihood of getting your idea translated from your laboratory or from the place where you invented it or discovered it into the real world.